to deliberately falsify information when presenting it to the Congress of the United States. And I need to remind you that when you lie to the Congress in the conduct of your official duty, that, sir, is a felony. That constitutes a high crime. That is what we talk about when we speak of impeachment.
Good. Well, now, as I never said, Section 8 of the Iraq Liberation Act was not and is not the warrant for the deployment of American forces. That, of course, had to be separately applied for, to the Senate and the Congress, and was granted. But I simply said it became the policy of the United States, correctly in my view, that the government of Iraq should be changed. The post-Saddam era should begin. When I say I'm not bound by anything James Baker says, or chooses to say, or finds himself saying, I say no more than what I hope any citizen could say. I'm not bound by these fatuous remarks. It doesn't mean I pay no attention to fatuous remarks made by American politicians. But that, excuse me, sir, has nothing to do with the rule of law. And those of you who applauded Mr. Ritter's very glib statement that the process applied to Libya should have been applied to Iraq, perfectly missed, or chose to miss, the point that had just been made, which was the process in the case of Libya was the example of the disarmament of Iraq for its repeated non-compliance. We can't run this experiment, we can't run this policy without precedent, we can't run it as if we will never resort to force. We can't
what weapons did you want Saddam to give up? The ones
what?
he destroyed in the summer of 1991?
Excuse me?
Which weapons do you want him to give up? They were all gone in the summer of 1991. The CIA has already confirmed this. What weapons is he supposed to turn over?
No. Listen, we've concurred on this.
We're going to give you a chance to ask questions. Let them talk to each other for a while.
The inspections of 2002 and 3 to discover what had happened to the weapons the Iraqis had declared long after 1991.
And
if you are beginning to have your head spin about this order of precedence, ladies and gentlemen, you can simply go and Google the name Rolf Ekeus, E-K-E-U-S, the head of UNSCOM, and see what he has to say about this. He's the greatest authority in the world on the matter. I think you'll find that anyone believing that Iraq posed no threat, had no ambitions in the nuclear and chemical and biological weapons area in 2002 would have been fooling themselves, and would have been in the degrading position, furthermore, of having to take the word of Saddam Hussein, a proven liar, who ran a ministry of concealment run by one of his sons. Now, these are the choices a president has to make. You, in these circumstances, in these grave days, have to put yourself in that position. You're not just commentators and theatre critics for presidential rhetoric, some of which can sometimes be tiresome. Now, I'll have to add a couple of things, at least one anyway, before I hand the microphone back to Mr. Ritter. Iraq is not occupied by its Iraq is not occupied. It's okay, no, believe me, I've seen a whole lot worse. And heard. Iraq is not occupied by President Jalal Talabani. Okay? President Jalal Talabani is not in occupation of his own country. He's the first elected president Iraq has ever had. I think it's fair, furthermore, to say that without the presence of American and British soldiers there would not have been that election. But is this occupation, as you understand? President Talabani's people 10 years ago were living in poisoned and ruined and gassed towns, a despised, mass-murdered minority driven onto the hillsides out of their ruined cities. I think it's rather marvelous that a man of that caliber and bravery, the leader of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the corresponding party, by the way, in Iraq of the Socialist International, of which I'm myself a member, should be able to run for election and win with the votes of Iraqis and Kurds of all stripes. That's not, it's an insult to say he's occupying his own country. He's the first leader the Iraqis have ever had the chance to choose themselves. And if it took soldiers to do it, then we should be very proud of it. And anyone who says, and I'll make a pact with anyone on this, any questioner in the future, or Mr. Ritter now, or our chair, I will not speak for the dead, or presume to do so, if they won't. But I don't like hearing the dead spoken for, and I suspect of grave demagogy and bad faith anyone who makes the assumption that they can invoke the names of our dead in their own cause. I promise I won't do it. And if I did, you'd see how ludicrous and parodic it would look. So don't do it yourself, if you take my moral advice.
But
it's obscene to do it, and it shouldn't be done.
But Christopher, the president has done it.
I know.
The president has justified the continuing of the war based on the people.
There are two things I believe that should never be said. One is, if you support a war, that it must go on by definition, because otherwise those who've already died have died in vain. There's no war that couldn't be justified by a rhetorical sleight of hand like that. That's sheer demagogy too. It commits the same obscenity. I've written this many times. Well, but if that's wrong, then it's wrong also to say that because of our dead, a war is not worth fighting. The moral question of deciding, ladies and gentlemen, for yourselves and debating with others whether or not a war is just is one of the oldest questions before humanity. It's a very important matter, quite complex and quite intense. It cannot be discussed by those who say that only a war is just if it leads to no death. That's morally frivolous. It's morally null. It's ahistorical. It's silly. You should give it up. You look like fools when you try.
Mr. Well, all due respect, I need to probably remind you for just a second that I served as a commissioned officer in the United States Marine Corps in time of war. I know full well what it means. Full well what it means to take Marines into harm's way. I also understand the consequences of these actions. I don't invoke the loss of American life lightly. In fact, I chide Congressman Murtaugh, who speaks out against the war today, citing the significant loss of American life. With all due respect to the former colonel who served in combat in the United States Marine Corps, we put 5,000 Marines across the beach at Iwo Jima, and that was a war worth fighting and a loss that must have been sustained at that time. We lost more Marines in Okinawa, again, in a cause worth fighting. It's not about 2,100 dead Americans in Iraq, because if this was a war worth fighting, 21,000 is not an insignificant loss. 210,000 is a loss that is heavy, but must be sustained if this is a war worth fighting. But what I implored every American before we went to war to consider is this: put yourself in the shoes of a Marine Corps Rifle Company commander, and now write that letter home. The one that tells mom and dad, sister and brother that their boy will no longer be celebrating Christmas or Thanksgiving or birthday. It better be one hell of a letter. It better be a letter that's more about flag, God, duty, honor. It had to be about a cause worthy of the sacrifice. And the reason why I invoke the numbers is because there's 2,125 letters that are not doing the job. This is a war that's not worth the loss of one American, because it's a war based upon a lie. If we wanted to go to war to liberate Iraq, the president should have made that case, but he didn't. He made a case only about weapons of mass destruction, and this was a case built on a lie, and there's no way the revisionists of history can undo that.
Well, as I've already, I'll stop saying this if you'll stop saying how many times you were in the Marine Corps. I'm not here to represent President Bush. I'll have to say it again. But I will have to say that occasionally one has to defend him against certain kinds of witless defamation, as that he's doing this for his daddy, or he's doing it for the profits of his friends in politics and so forth, frivolous and flippant remarks of this kind. And as a matter of fact, in his speeches to the United Nations, he mentioned many other aspects of the crisis with Iraq, as well as weapons of mass destruction. You can look up the speeches. I'm not going to replay them for you, but they're there to be looked up. I'm sorry, though, that there's something in me that is not going to take a lot of ethical rhetoric, let alone humanist rhetoric, from someone who's just said that if he was an Iraqi, he'd prefer to live under Saddam Hussein. I haven't got over that yet.
Well, let me pose it in a different way.
Which, in other words, means you would prefer, because you aren't an Iraqi, it's as good as saying they'd be better off under Saddam Hussein. And there are implications of that, too, because American soldiers would have had to die to keep Saddam Hussein going pretty soon. After all, it was Schwarzkopf who who was willing to run the risk of losing American lives, who gave permission to Saddam Hussein to renew genocide in Iraq. American soldiers were being killed then too. American soldiers have been killed on the wrong side in the Middle East. And maybe again, the whole reason why